And here we are. We're on live. This is the second edition of the Unplanned podcast. And true to the name, I did absolutely no planning for this. And kind of my way of thinking is if you have like really interesting, intelligent, thoughtful people, you don't need to plan it. It'll evolve in a very organic way. And I kind of like that, kind of like jazz musicians improvising. So, and of course, if you've come with questions, you can feel free to ask each other. But anyway, I'm Tim Sullivan. I'm with three of my favorite people, all very interesting, thoughtful people. And I wanted to get everybody together, specifically Sarai, who's at the bottom, as I look at it, to the right, and Christian Boetcher, to the left at the bottom. Both of you are in the medical field, and I thought it would be really interesting to introduce you guys and see where the discussion goes. And Maya is just somebody I do a lot of co-moderating with, and I like the questions she asks. She's very interesting. So, and she, like me, she has nothing to do with the medical field. The only thing I have to do with it, I co-authored a book on medical English, but that's all I've ever done. So with that said, I thought I would go around the horn, maybe start with Maya and just quickly introduce yourself, and then, we'll just start freestyling.
Sure. Okay, Maya Matsuoka here. And I'm very, very happy to finally meet you all, Christian and Sarai. So I have heard so much about you from Tim, and it's great. Okay, I work basically in the field of outbound travel and tourism here in Japan. But thanks to the pandemic, actually, I started a new project, which is a private one, and Tim is helping me a lot with it. And it is called Japan Expert Insights, and I am trying to help people who are in Japan short term, I mean foreign expatriates who are short term in Japan, get a better understanding of how the country works, the business here, works, and also how the Japanese society is, and so on. Okay, that's it.
Okay. Thank you,
Is
Maya.
it enough?
Yeah. For now, we can keep going and talking later. But yeah, Christian, introduce yourself, please.
Sure. My name is Christian. Originally from Germany. I moved around a lot. Spent over 10 years in Los Angeles. Lived in Boston for a year. 3 years in London. A couple of years in Paris, and altogether, I think about 13, 14 years now in Japan. So quite a mix. And I work for a large consulting firm running our what we call life science and healthcare group, looking after mostly foreign multinational accounts in like the pharma space or medical device, medtech space. But we also do a lot of work for the government, which is quite challenging, with the whole pandemic going on, a lot of things related to COVID-19 vaccinations. And I sit on an advisory panel for the Cabinet Office for healthcare reforms here in Japan. And there's a lot of work to be done. Japan has many issues in the healthcare field. There is a shortage of physicians, especially in the countryside. Patients have to travel long distance or long hours to get access to specialists, and the whole field of telemedicine has really just started here in Japan. Japan has been really hesitant to take that up. So that's something we're trying to work with. There's some infrastructure issues behind that, but also some policy blockers to really slow down the adoption of telemedicine. So there's a lot of different topics that get involved, but mostly anything healthcare related, working with the government, but also a lot of private businesses. That's what I do.
Thank you, Christian. Sarai-san, sensei.
So, yes, we just had that fascinating discussion about whether or not to say sensei before the podcast. But
I vote for sensei.
Me too.
My name is Sarai. I am originally a medical doctor. I now work as a medical translator in Düsseldorf in Germany. I translate predominantly medical documents from Japanese and German and now Dutch into English. Fascinating job, fascinating space to work in. Yeah, I actually wanted to jump in when I heard Christian say to talk about telemedicine. It's fascinating because it's a field that I'm very interested in. I have actually noticed how hard it is for telemedicine to be taken up in Germany as well. So I feel quite fortunate to have this perspective of what is going on in Europe, and also be in contact with what's going on in Japan through the research, through the studies, and obviously through the all sorts of other regulatory medical documents that come out of Japan that I get to translate. So yeah, it's quite a fascinating field to be in, and I'm also really happy to be here because you all seem like such impressive people. So
Yeah.
How did
You
you
are.
pick up Japanese? Going from South Africa to Germany, how did you pick up Japanese? Were you in Japan previously?
I went to yes, I went to I did a when I was in my 5th year in med school, I did an exchange program. I went to Japan, and then and obviously it's fascinating. I mean, when I went there was so I went to Nippon Ikadaigaku. So they were just developing a way to detect thyroid cancer cells so the person would drink a fluid that was fluorescent labeled, and then they had a special light, and they would shine the light on the tumor during the surgery, and then only cut out the parts that were tumor. I was like, I want to come work here. I want to come work here. I want to come live here. This is what I want to do for the rest of my life. This is fascinating. So yeah, so that was my once I saw how advanced the science and the research was in Japan, I absolutely wanted to live there. Started learning the language. As I always say, if I knew how long it would take me to learn Japanese, I would never have started in the first place.
I'm still learning.
It's
Sure.
I feel like
Yeah.
I feel like anyone who didn't have to who didn't grow up immersed in the language, I feel like we are going to be learning for the rest of our lives.
Yeah,
it's
for sure.
It's just that kind of language.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well,
So
I want to interject real briefly. So in our last podcast, Sarai, you mentioned that Japan had this cutting edge medical research, and as somebody out of the field, that kind of surprised me. And then that's actually when I thought of Christian. So I was kind of interested also on getting Christian's perspective as well. I mean, I know the flaws and the positives, so I think you can maybe give a really nuanced and balanced view of that.
Yeah, I mean, I got mixed opinions on that, and I work with the government a lot, and then also some of the larger hospitals here in Japan, and we have some partnerships with some municipalities, especially in the oncology space. We do a lot with Chiba City. We do quite a bit down in the Kansai area, where there's a big bio tech hub that was set up as a partnership between hospitals and academic institutions and private industry. But overall, Japan is quite good at adapting any new treatments for any disease. So it's not like the UK, which runs a program called NICE, where they really look at economic benefit of treatments, like health economic outcomes research, where they say, that treatment costs $500,000 and it would prolong life for 3 or 4 months. We're not going to do that. So that's basically the UK approach, and that doesn't exist here in Japan. There's pricing pressure on new treatments, but normally the Japanese government is quite good at reimbursement. And there's a lot of work being done in the oncology space. But having said that, the quality of Japanese healthcare varies a lot. And if you know where to go, you can get world-class, top quality medical care here in Japan. But there's also quite a few hospitals or clinics and physicians who are not very good, are not up to global standard, and I think that's an issue here in Japan, because it's quite easy. If you have money, it's quite easy to get into medical school. and you just pay your way through it. And I'm lucky that through work we have about 15 medical doctors working in my group, that I can just say, oh, I have this issue, of which hospital should I go to? And that's key here in Japan. So it's a mixed bag in Japan. Some areas are very, very advanced. Some hospitals are top-notch, world-class, but some places I would advise you to get admitted. So if you ever have to go to hospital, let me know. We have a list, kind of a blacklist. You know, these are the places to go. And
now I'm really glad we had this podcast. But Christian, I think that's such a great point, because I had the good fortune when I was in college, I taught a bunch of doctors, and they were all Keio University doctors. So they were really pretty good doctors, right, in their field. And today, one of my best Japanese friends is a Japanese doctor, again, a Keio graduate, and he does the same. He'll say, go there, don't go there. So I get similar advice. Yeah, interesting. Does that strike anything different, Sarai? What are your thoughts on that? Is that new information to you?
So, well, I think that's kind of, I mean, I don't mean to be pessimistic about the field of medicine as a whole, but got to say that does, I mean, there's similar issues around the world. First of all, the fact that getting into medicine is expensive. Like, you really, I mean, in South Africa, if your parents were not wealthy, you were not studying medicine. I mean, okay, you could get a scholarship, but you had to come from the kind of family where you had the money to be able to do something like medicine. So there is a tendency for people to rely more on their, shall we say, privilege than actually getting stuck into the material, because they see medicine as a way to continue living a prestigious lifestyle. And so not all doctors, unfortunately, not all doctors are in it for, you know, humanitarian reasons and to help people. Some of them are in it for the money and prestige, and that does create a lot of problems. I think definitely the difference between rural and urban areas, I think that's a global issue. I think it's worse in countries where so okay, I'll give an example. In South Africa, there's a system where once we finish medical school, we have a year of internship, which we can do. I mean, you just need to do it at a hospital, but we have a year, or now 2 years, of community service where you have to work for a government hospital. They try and prioritize government hospitals in rural areas, and that sort of mandates, you know, or how can I say it? It gives the benefit is that you have people who are still fresh from university and still with that, you know, sense of sort of medical idealism, going into rural areas where they can provide care, but not staying so long that they become disillusioned. Whereas you don't have that in countries like Germany, for example. It's, you know, you get to pick wherever you go, and, you know, big cities are popular, they're nice to live in. Going out into the countryside isn't great. So I think those are definite issues. I think from my perspective, because I'm no longer practicing medicine, I'm more in contact with the research, and seeing the amount of, for me, what's so impressive is the way that basic research is carried over into the clinical field in Japan. Because in most other countries, there isn't this close connection between like basic research and clinical research. I think in Japan, even though the process takes a long time because of well, I'm sure you all know the cultural aspects of how long it takes to agree on anything and what to do and all that stuff. I think the amount of carryover seems to be so much greater than in other countries, and obviously the translational research. I mean, it's fascinating to look at it from an academic point of view, but I can very much appreciate that from a practical point of view, like on the ground, it's a very, very different story, I think. So it's interesting. Yeah.
Sarai, I think this might be a good time to let everybody know that Sarai is formulating a plan to eventually move to Japan, start a business here. And I thought that Maya and Christian maybe could give you some pointers that might help you in your transition. Again, this is a lot. You can, you know, fill in the blanks. I don't know if it's a 1-year plan, a 2-year plan. I don't know what it is, but I thought this would be a good forum maybe for you to, you know, bestow your advice on Sarai Sensei.
Well, I looked at your background, and you have the type of profile of people we're actually looking for. I work for Deloitte Consulting, and we look for people who have a medical background. As I said, we have about 15 MDs currently work in my group, and it's something you bring a skill that is in short supply here. And the added bonus is you speak Japanese. Normally I tell people here, I talk to a lot of people who want to move to Japan and who don't speak the language at all. And then you really need to have some skill that is in high demand. So there's a lot of people who want to come here and want to work here, but who really don't have anything to offer. And then basically your only option is teaching English or doing some manual labor jobs in the service industry. But, somebody with your background, I think you have a wide variety of options. Also, if you ever want to get back into medicine, the Japanese government is on track. I think it's still going to take them a few years to allow foreign qualified MDs to work in Japan. Initially, they when I first heard that, I had to laugh. They said, "Oh yeah, we're going to allow foreign licensed medical professionals to work here in Japan in certain hospitals, but they can only treat foreign patients." Which really stuck me as a typical Japanese thing in a way. So, yeah, you're a foreigner. You're only allowed to be foreigners because Japanese patients are different.
Yeah.
But that will be relaxed because there is an incredible shortage of medical practitioners, healthcare practitioners here, and nurses and doctors as well. So, but somebody, your background, if you ever want to go back into consulting, but also medical writing, medical editing, translation, there is a lot of demand here. So there's a resource shortage also for people in all these fields. So I think you have very good prospects to get over here. Happy to introduce you to some people, some recruiters who are trustworthy. There's about 90% of these people I wouldn't trust. Some really shady characters out there. But happy to set you up with some people who are trustworthy and who know what they're doing.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. I'll be very, very grateful. And I do want to add that the reason why the plan is so, yes, it's a 2-year plan. I just want to add that the reason why is because I want to do a master's in pharmacovigilance. I mean, I think Christian, you will know what that is, but pharmacovigilance is like monitoring the safety of medicines and medical devices, and monitoring as when things are when medicines and products are released into, or devices are released onto the market, monitoring that they are safe and that nobody gets hurt from them, but even doing that over time, like not just going, oh, it works, and leaving it, actually monitoring and following up on that over time. So I'm hoping that's going to give me another plus point in that sense, because with the medical background, I think it's a nice combination to have. So I'm really encouraged by what you've said, and so we'll definitely stay in touch.
Yeah, pharmacovigilance is a big thing here, and the Japanese are probably, or the Japanese medical establishment is probably globally the most afraid and cautious on drug safety. Right. If you look at the vaccination space, like there is no MMR vaccine. It all gets done in individual doses. There were some issues with the HPV vaccine here about 10, 15 years ago. So right now, less than 1% of female teenagers get the HPV vaccine. Everybody, and you have the same thing in oncology. There are no real oncologists in Japan. It's mostly surgeons who treat cancer, and they take a very conservative approach because naturally, if you're on chemotherapy or on some immuno-oncology treatments, you're going to have side effects. You're going to some people are going to have some severe reactions. So most physicians start at extremely small doses here. Not like the Western approach, like Europe or the US. We're like, okay, we've got to be really aggressive treating this tumor here, or your blood cancer. Here they just start really, really slow and then really slowly increase the dosage, and which is not the right approach in a lot of cases. But pharmacovigilance it's a big thing here, and people are really, I got a slight headache, the whole COVID-19 vaccination, my arm hurts, I'm never going to do this again, and people are really overreacting a bit, in my opinion.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Maya, you've been kind of quiet. I know you've got some great things to contribute. So, what are your thoughts?
No, it was interesting to me what the Christian said, that, of course, foreign medical doctors are not allowed to practice in Japan.
Yeah.
And if they are, when they will be allowed to treat foreign patients only. And I wonder what the reasons for that are, basically, if you have heard anything about that, Christian. Just because, of course, the easiest thing which comes to mind is, the language barrier. So if you don't speak Japanese, of course, you cannot treat Japanese who don't speak English or any other language anyway. But are there any other reasons for that?
No, it's initially just primarily the language issue, and then just general cautiousness of not wanting foreign doctors here. Having said that, there are quite a number of foreign doctors here. In Tokyo, you have like the Tokyo Medical and Surgical Clinic. Right next to me, there's a clinic that has a few foreigners. They even have a Russian nurse, Japan licensed nurse. But I have a German friend. He is a practicing medical doctor in Tokyo. And you have to, if you're foreign licensed, you have to take the Japanese medical exam here, MD exam, which according to everybody I talked to is extremely easy. If you speak Japanese. If you speak Japanese, everybody said this is like by far the easiest way to get qualified as a doctor.
Oh my dear.
But you need to spend about 2 years to get all the Japanese medical terminology down, all the kanji and that stuff. But the exam itself is seen as much less strict than, for example, the Philippines or Malaysia or Thailand. So the barriers to entry are a lot easier. But then because you have Japanese as a prerequisite, that makes it complicated. What they're talking about now is having doctors who come here, they don't have to take any more exam, but then that's why they said initially they can only treat foreigners, and that's a language requirement. And they will also look at where you got your license from. So they will have a white list of countries that they see as equivalent or on par with Japan. I'm sorry, I need to get that and I need to drop off, okay?
All right, talk later, man.
Thanks a lot.
Okay.
Bye. I actually just want to jump in and say, yes, the medical exam, the biggest hurdle is exactly that, having the understanding of enough medical terminology and medical, I suppose, understanding how the Japanese medical system works, which is, much more organized and I mean, the system in principle, the theoretical stuff is much more organized than some other systems in the world, and then having the understanding of the language, because the language is, I mean,
I need to go, sorry.
Okay.
We'll catch up separately and we should do this again. Sorry, guys.
No, thank you. Thank you. We'll
Thank you.
Being here.
Yeah, we can, for now, the three of us, but I accomplished what I wanted to accomplish. I wanted to connect you two, because I thought that he would be able to help you out in some way. And so it looks like that's, you impressed him, obviously. Of course you did. Of course you did.
Impressed me.
He's a really impressive guy. And the way I know Christian, Maya knows this, I worked in the same company that Christian did in the 1990s when he lived in Los Angeles. And I was living in Chicago, and we worked for a company called Japan Management Association Consultants. And they set up an office in the US, and they had two strategic areas. One was the Midwest, where all the manufacturing was, right? Mostly automotive. And I worked in that group because that's where I lived. And it was basically industrial engineering, management, consulting related to factory, shop floor operations, things like that. And he worked in California near San Jose. Obviously Silicon Valley was the big thing. So that, but they did manufacturing as well, and unfortunately, like, we never worked together, but our paths crossed a lot because we both worked there. And it's really nice to see he's come up in the world. I mean, he's got a really good position now, and he's a very, obviously very, very qualified, very intelligent, brilliant guy. So I'm happy to see my friend succeed, And
Yeah, it was fascinating to hear his level of insight into the medical field as a whole, not just one area, but the
right.
entire system and structure. So that was fascinating. I did want to say, Maya. I mean, I was sort of aware that Christian would have to leave, so um, and I wanted to wait until. No offense, not because not because of anything against him, but I wanted to wait until he was gone to say that I actually wrote to Maya and specifically asked her about what it's like being a businesswoman in Japan. And she had some interesting things to say. I don't know if she's willing to share some of them here because I found it so helpful and so insightful. Would you like to share some of that, Maya? It was really a great answer.
Yeah, please.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think that most of the women, foreign women who live here, they have more or less the same experience. So it's like, in terms of, social life and also family life, we have it the easy way, I think, because we're foreigners and we're not expected to be culturally, the same as the local population here. So, and because of that, we don't have to be, basically, and we can. I mean, as long as you are willing to accept the local culture and the local way of doing things and so on, you are fine. But when it comes to business, things change suddenly, and it's really different because, especially if you come, well, let me say, if you don't come as an expatriate first, because I came here, I married my husband, and we came here, and after that, I started looking for a job in Japan. So it was really very hard, and it was 20 years ago. And of course, at that point, I didn't speak Japanese, and I was a woman, who was expected, to have a family soon. I mean, that was probably from the local business person's perspective, And so first, it took me very, very long to find a job, and of course. When I did, I did everything possible to keep the job, of course. I mean, but everybody does that anyway. So, and it's like, well, still, being a woman in Japan, businesswoman in Japan is really tough because, yeah, there is always, in the business setting, there is that. Well, first you need to understand the culture, the business culture here. And then, of course, the learning curve is quite steep. And once you understand that, even then, there are cultural faux pas. Well, sorry, I'm not sure that my pronunciation is
Yeah.
really
Right.
good, but yeah,
I
but
think so, yeah.
in most of the time, most of the cases, even though you know how things work and you're very careful, well, inevitably you make a mistake at some point, and then that mistake suddenly sets you back so much, just. And I have personally, especially during the past 14 years, when I have been working for the same organization, but it's like what happened to me, people would say, wow, you're like Japanese, we don't feel uncomfortable when you are around you, we feel so comfortable, you're not like a foreigner. And I think that it was not on purpose. I tried to fit, not so much because I wanted to, but because I that was the only way to survive there, and it was more a kind of subconscious, unconscious, let's say, trial. And but at the same time, it also came with a price, just because on the way, I think that I lost myself, my foreignness, to and it was really hard. So yeah, and that's a kind of very, for me personally, I have not come out of that, of the woods yet, I think. So I'm just trying to invent myself as a foreigner again. So not exactly,
Yeah, that's so interesting. So obviously I'm talking to two women, so I don't directly feel what you guys experience. So so listening to you, reveals my own blind spots. That said, for men, there's overlap. When you're in Japan, you're trying to adapt. I kind of went through the same thing in that you kind of like take on Japanese-like qualities, not consciously. It's like by osmosis, right? And you don't even realize it until you go back to your own country. And in my case, it was like I go from, the Yokohama area to Portland, Tennessee, 5,000 people, right? And I'm not from the South. I'm from the North. I'm from Chicago. So I'm a Yankee from their point of view, right? And they were wonderful people. I made lots of friends there, but it was still a different culture, right? And, I didn't realize how Japanese I had become in many ways until I went back. And then I had to readjust. And especially when I ended up going back to Chicago, which is those are my people. That's my tribe, right? And you get back with your old friends and your family, and you're like, that's who I was. I was part of that tribe right there. And what it did was it helped me like balance myself. You know what I mean? Like kind of readjust and calibrate. And I didn't abandon all my Japanese traits. I still think there were a lot that I became part of me, and I really like those traits. But there were some things that, I had to strike that balance and still be authentic, be who I am. And now I'm a big proponent when I do my seminars, and I know I told you this, Sarai, don't try to be Japanese, because you never will. And you'll creep them out, and they don't really want you to be Japanese. They want you to be authentic. I think they value authenticity. It's just like everybody does, right? And the other point, and Maya and I talk about this a lot, there's a lot of foreigners who live here, and all they do is criticize Japan. And they talk about, oh, the Japanese, these are the bad things, and I can't be part of their groups. And Maya and I are like, well, then why do you live here? If it's such a terrible place to live. That's one thing. Two, Maya and I both have lots of Japanese friends. So we don't really share that experience of having trouble getting in with the Japanese group. Now, that said, there is a dichotomy, but the dichotomy is a good one in that most people from my culture wouldn't really want to be accepted by the Japanese, because now you're in the pressure cooker, and now you have all these obligations, and now you have to smother yourself for the harmony of the group. And most people in my culture, that's not a trade-off they want to make. They would, and I guess my point is, it's very beneficial being a foreigner here if you learn how to play the game, and sometimes you got to pick your battles, but you adapt, and you learn how to deal with it, but without losing who you are. Does that make sense? That's my experience.
Yes, very much. Yes, it does. And I agree with you 100%, if not 120. So, yes. And yeah, it's very, very true. And basically, when you don't try, when you're not in the pressure cooker, you have that point of view which can be very that's the
contrarian.
Contrarian, yes, that too. But also, it can you can contribute a lot to the people you work with, because you're not inside. And being outside actually gives you a different perspective. And it often helps, because if you're too close to the things which bother you, you very often struggle to find the answer. But if you have distanced a little bit, or a little bit more anyway, so it's easier to see things in perspective, and find better answers, maybe not the best ones, but still better ones. So it's really, I don't know, but that's probably very important.
Sorry, I'm such an amateur. So we're back. All that interesting talk, it's in the ether now. Because I forgot to hit the record button. It's me, the unplanned podcaster.
So that's organic fun, you know.
Yes. Well, I think that
Yes.
I think I mean I think we're still going to have interesting things to talk about,
I
but
hope so. I
Yes.
think so.
I I do think that what I find fascinating about what both of you have said is the fact that efficiency is not the most important point in Japan. It's more about effectiveness, because I do feel like, okay, well, I mean, living in Germany, Germans are stereotypically associated with a lot of efficiency, and to me, that shows itself when you try and contact someone during between 9 and 5. If you try and contact someone on WhatsApp or social media, Facebook, LinkedIn, German people are not on their phones. I mean, obviously there are exceptions. It depends from person to person. They don't look at their phones. They don't do private things. They really save everything for when I'm done with work. I mean, however long they work. And what surprised me about coming here was the attitude of so in German you say Feierabend. Feierabend is just the end of the day when you get to go home and cut loose, except the word sort of implies that it's like a celebration. It's like a, yeah, I'm done. And when that happens, like, it doesn't matter if there's still work to be done or not. um the attitude in Germany is, you are paying me for to be here for 8 hours a day. When those 8 hours are done, I am leaving. That's it. I'm done. I don't care what is going on. I mean, I'm sure they care, but they're like, this is, if you're not going to pay me extra, I'm out, right? And from what both of you are saying, it sounds like that's completely different in Japan. So I honestly think that's going to be one of the challenges for me to adapt to, is going to be exactly that, is that I've gotten used to the attitude that people have here of, we have a fixed time and this is what we're going to do and this is how we're going to do it. And shifting back to this idea of, well, it's also, I mean, there's more to it than just the work, right? There's more to it than just getting the work done.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be a.
But if you have your own company, you kind of get to set your own terms. It's not like you're going to be working in an office with a bunch of Japanese people around you. So I don't think that's going to apply to you. But kind of to the whole efficiency thing, I always like to say, why aren't they efficient, right? And one is, again, we talked about the focus on effectiveness, but I also think that some of the biggest speed bumps to efficiency is harmony, making sure
Harmony.
nobody loses face, and we got to go and talk to everybody privately, because we can't do it in a big meeting because someone might lose face.
Yeah.
And that's, the Confucian way of saying, let's do this, let's work out all the issues behind the scenes, and then we'll come together for the meeting and announce the decision that's already been made. So that in itself makes efficiency almost impossible. That, and what I mentioned before I started recording, multitasking, because you're at, there's no strict, narrowly defined jobs in not every company, but most companies. And so you're kind of like expected to do whatever direction they pull you in to do. And it's just really hard to be, efficient when you're multitasking. And just to that one quick point I want to make, because it's related to gender. I had a really, really good Japanese friend. He was in America for almost 30 years, and he spoke really good English. And the longer he worked, the more he realized how much he enjoyed working with American women. And this is what he said to me. And he goes, I'll never admit this publicly. This was over a few beers. He said, I would rather have a whole office full of women, American women, than American men, because they work, their way of working is closer to my style. They're better multitaskers. He goes, and I don't know where it comes from. Maybe it's the woman holding the baby, feeding the baby, cooking, the phone rings. She closes the refrigerator door with her foot, and she's like, maybe she's been socially conditioned more so than men to multitask. And this was his explanation, for what it's worth. But he said, and they're more focused on human relationships, and they're more into keeping the harmony as much as possible and still getting stuff done. That was his view on it. what do you guys think? That was one guy's perspective that I thought was really interesting, a Japanese guy's perspective.
Yeah, it's interesting for me because I'm I don't know if it has something to do with the lack of children, but I'm terrible at multitasking. Terrible at it. I don't.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you would be working on something and someone would come and say, "Oh, I need you to do something. Can you stop what you're doing?" And that would drive me nuts.
It drove me nuts, but I did my gum on.
That would drive me absolutely nuts because I need to have these long periods of concentration, especially with something like translation, where it is something that involves an incredible amount of concentration.
Yes.
But it's not just concentrating; it's concentrating and processing what you're both reading and writing.
Yeah.
I would, and to your point about having my own company, that is one of the reasons why I feel like it's almost essential for me to create these spaces for myself where I can be independent of a company structure, because I know that for me personally, it's not just the fact that you have to manage all of the social aspects. It's also just the general corporate environment and the rules and you're supposed to look a certain way, dress a certain way, talk a certain way. Certain topics are off limits. I'm not good at the off limits topic.
Yeah. No. I agree. That's why I went independent 20 years ago for that I'm a lone wolf, as I've told Maya many times. Yeah.
Yes, you have. And that's why I am, trying just to get independent now. So it's, yeah. I mean, at certain point, obviously, when you work, for a certain number of years, and when you have that experience, you suddenly realize, it's not such a sudden realization anyway, but you realize that that's the best way, for personal well-being, at least, so that you can actually contribute to the people around you, and at the same time, enjoy what you're doing without the stress of the pressure cooker. So,
Yes.
yeah.
And for what it's worth, though, I mean, I am very grateful for having worked for Japanese companies, corporate Japan, having worked for corporate America, because it gave me knowledge and a background. I look at it as that was me going to school and to graduate school. Like when you start up a company from zero, you're building new systems. You're not inheriting this turnkey set of systems, right? And if there's only two bilingual people in the company, guess what? You're in at least half the meetings, if not most of the meetings. So to me, it was hard and it was frustrating. And I didn't like all the things I had to do, but I did them. But I learned a lot, and it allowed me to go independent. See what I'm saying? So it was at a certain point in my life, I think it was really necessary for me to go through it and do it. But you get to a certain age, and you're done with it. It's time to move on and do my thing, So, and I hope Maya you can quickly transition sooner than
Thank
later.
you. I'm doing my best. So, yes, but yes, that's very important. And also, I mean, there is so much to learn, Tim, to your point, about, structure, company structure. Especially, I have learned a lot about how to structure a company after, these years in Japanese organizations. So, and basically, yeah, it's very important. Of course, before I came to Japan, I worked for a company back in Bulgaria, and there is no base for comparison. So, I mean,
Right.
yeah, but you learn because the very fact that you are given that opportunity to compare and the ability to compare, how things are done here and there. So it also, helps you basically analyze and learn even more. That's the next step. Actually, it's not like you just assimilate what you are given, but you analyze things and you realize which is better and what is better and what you want to do.
Yeah. And
This
go ahead.
I,
Go
want,
ahead, sir.
I wanted to jump in and say I just thought of something about talking about the gender aspect. Um, it just occurred to me that a good point to mention in this regard is that and this is, I don't know if this is going to rub people up the wrong way, but as a woman, when you go into a work environment, there is almost, especially these really structured corporate environments, like Maya mentioned it earlier, there's sort of an expectation that, oh, well, you're going to leave to start a family anyway, or you're not really here to work because whoever, your partner is the primary breadwinner, so you're not going to be very serious about work. And also there are all sorts of stereotypes about women in the workplace that, I mean, we've come a long way from where we were, say, 50 years ago, but there's still a lot, or at least when I left working environments, there's still a lot of that sort of attitude in the workspace. And to the point that your friend made, Tim, I think the thing is, as a woman, if you want to be taken seriously, you almost have to do that little bit extra to show I'm you can think whatever you want about me, but I'm going to almost prove you wrong, because it doesn't help to have the discussions. I've got to say, in my experience, it's pointless telling people. I still, to this day, when I have the conversation about I'm not going to have children, I still have people telling me, oh, no, you'll change your mind, but all women do that. Like, we're not all a homogenous group, we are individuals, so I feel like the conversations don't work, but it's like in a work environment, when you want to be taken seriously as a woman, you really have to put a lot of effort into it. And I think that aspect probably comes across to people who are in other cultures more than people who are in our own sort of, as in, for me, coming from an English speaking culture where there were very I want to say there were very strong impressions about gender roles. Coming from sub-Saharan Africa, there was a very strong idea of gender roles. My family was very progressive, so I didn't grow up with that. But that was generally the idea. And I definitely think that in that sense, my work ethic that was developed from interacting with people in a professional space is probably what this Japanese friend of yours was talking about. At least that would be my impression.
And it's so funny you mentioned women having to try a little harder. I failed to mention that's another thing my friend said. He goes, American women have a complex because there's this bias against them, so they actually try harder. So he actually did say that. So it kind of dovetails with what you said. So interesting. But
Maya, what would you say? Maya, what would you say? Because I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yes, she's a woman. She knows. I don't know anything.
Well, I come from a very, I would say a different culture anyway. So because I come from Eastern Europe, but, I grew up in a family where my mother had a successful career. She actually raised the family, 2 children, while she was actually, developing her career. So it was, for me, it's never been a question whether I should work or not. And, so it has always been there. So I'm there because I can contribute in some ways, maybe not so big ways, but, there are ways I can contribute by working for a company, for organization and so on. So for me, it has never been a question. And I think that for although the women in my generation there back in Bulgaria, it's like this, because all of my classmates, they're working, they're having families, and always just like normal. It goes without saying. But when I came to Japan, and it was so it was a kind of shocking anyway, because the first time, I found a job, and they told me, our working hours are, for example, from 9 to 5. And, you have to be here all the time, of course, by the way. But, what really surprised me was like, okay, you go back home and talk with your husband and ask him whether he'll be fine with this.
Yep.
So first you need permission.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. So,
Ooh.
and that was really interesting. And that was the first place when I was the most shocked. But it has happened every time, I have applied for a job and I have gotten the position. Every time, because I have worked only for Japanese companies here. And that's what happens, you need the permission of your husband, of your family. Yes, so that you can, even though you're applying for the job, and you're going to the interview, it's you who is going to work there, you need the permission of the husband. And then it's like, wow, I mean, it was really. But also I have to be very honest that when we came here, my husband and I, when we came here, so, and I was so, because I didn't know anybody, I didn't speak the language. And so my husband worked, late nights. Sometimes he wouldn't be at home until, let's say, 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. And that was, and I was so lonely and so desperate, to do something. And so I started looking for a job. Of course, that was the most logical, solution for me. And of course, I was brought up to know that I was going to work and so on. And I started looking for a job, and I found, because at that point I found only part-time jobs. So I found 3 part-time jobs, at 3 different places. So I kept busy from Monday until Saturday, and I was happy. But my father-in-law, he was kind of upset, and I loved him because he passed away several years ago, but I loved him. He was really that very sweet, old-fashioned, very traditional Japanese guy. But in the beginning he was like, why do you want to work? You don't have to work. My son has a stable job.
Yeah.
So you don't have to work. You can stay at home, you can do whatever you want. And I told him, I want to work,
Yeah.
But that was, so it's really, it has been, well, in the beginning, at least, it was a struggle for me. And yeah, it's still,
It just, it
yeah.
just
The
reminds
irony is I need to get Kurumi's permission to do anything, and they never ask me to go talk to my wife, get her permission. Never. They just assume.
the wife must be fine with it. Because this reminds me of one of the days in when I was at Nippon Ika Daigaku, and they asked me, or they said, well, can we ask you some questions about what it's like being a doctor in South Africa? And I think one of the very first questions was, so when women graduate from medical school, do they actually work? And at the time,
Wow.
I didn't understand the question, because I was like, why would you go through 6 years of grueling studies, to then not? And it was only afterwards that I realized that actually a lot of Japanese women who go through med school don't actually end up in the employment system. And I was just shocked. And it only hit me because the students that or the people who were students then, I mean, they're doctors now, but the people I was in contact with, as the years went by, I realized that actually, yes, it was the men who were predominantly working. And there were 1 or 2 women who continued working continued working as doctors. Neither of them ended up specializing. They've become GPs, or they've been incorporated into a hospital system where they do like ward work and stuff like that. None of them specialized, and it just takes me back to that time when one of my professors was like, "Oh, I'd like you to meet one of the doctors working here. She's a woman," and he thought this was the biggest deal ever. And I was like, okay. And I met her, and she was specializing in surgery. And it was only much later that I realized what a big deal that was, and actually what an honor that was for me to meet someone who was, in Tokyo and one of the oldest universities there doing this. So it's just fascinating. And the idea that you have to ask your husband, because I've read a lot that says that, so West Germany is still, there is still an attitude of women don't have to work. Whereas from what I've read, in Eastern Europe, Western Europe, it's more like women don't have to work if they don't want to. but in Eastern Europe, it's like a given that women have children,
Yeah.
careers. It's just like it's normal. That it's not even nobody thinks about it or talks about it. It's just how it is. But to hear that you had to ask that they told you first ask your husband for permission. Yes. I mean, I would have been like, I don't need to. I think I'm not going to take this job. But I mean, of course, you don't always have the luxury to do that.
No, and you're asked the same thing at every company. So even if you say I'm not going to work here, the next company, so you get the same question. So
my boss this was in the U.S., but he was Japanese. We were interviewing people to be in the production control department, and he couldn't speak English, so I interpreted everything. And the first lady who applied, he actually said this, and I didn't translate it because he would have gotten in trouble, but he said exactly that. Sometimes our department has to go on the road and stay overnight in Detroit and other cities. Would your husband be okay with that? And I'm like, you can't ask that question. Why not? You can't. That's discriminatory. That's, gender discrimination. He had no clue. But to him, he had no bad intentions, but that's just his default mode, He probably thought he was being nice, by asking it. So,
but it also tells you so much. It tells you so much about the cultural roles expected here, because they never actually ask, the husbands to about their wives. Would your wife be okay with that? Would your family be okay with that? You're staying overnight, working at let's 2:00 in the morning. But most it's expected from the men here. But they never say, okay, your wife should give her permission for that. So wow.
So I wanted to jump in and say, okay, so this is going to be my perhaps my autistic lack of insight into interpersonal relationships. But I have to ask, what is why would a husband not be happy with his wife? For example, traveling. You mentioned traveling. You mentioned working long hours. Is the impression that without the wife, the husband is helpless? Like, because I can imagine. I mean, the social norms are sort of whatever. It's that the wife is supposed to cook and clean, but I can't imagine that suddenly, like for a couple of hours a week, a man is like so incapable that he's just like,
some of them
are. Is a mess. I'm hungry. I can't do anything about it. I mean, especially if that person is the primary breadwinner, I'm sorry, but again, I'm not the greatest at cooking, but I still manage to feed myself. So can you guys? I know maybe it's maybe for other people it's obvious, but can you just explain to me what the thinking behind that is? Because I just love to understand this.
Go ahead.
Well, yes. From what I hear, from my husband is that basically the traditional expectations here are that the wife stays at home and she runs the house. And running the house means that she takes care of everything which happens between those walls. So she takes care of, of course, the cleaning. Of course, she takes care of the cooking. She takes care of all the tasks of the family. So she has to make the schedule as well, for the weekend. You also, wives are expected, to take care of the children. And the schedule of the children, they participate in extracurricular activities, which are which the school of the kids, give the kids of the parents. So the wife is basically, the shacho, the CEO of the house. And if the wife is not there, so basically the house doesn't run. So, it is without the head, without the boss. But also, my husband tells me that when he was a child, his father was not happy with him going into the kitchen and watching, his mother cook, because his father would say, this is not a place for men, this is not a place for boys, this is a place, for women. So boys are not expected to learn these skills. So these are, as I told you, my father-in-law, he was a very, very traditional man. And, it didn't prevent him from being, very sweet. And we had great communication, but those are the values they had in the past.
Yeah.
So, Yeah.
and women traditionally take care of the finances and actually gives the husband allowance
Yeah.
in
That's
traditional. It's changing and not everybody does it now, but that's how it used to be.
yeah.
The finances I've definitely heard, but I didn't realize that it was so. Yeah, like I think the description of the chateau of the home is actually a really good one, because it's not just that there's gender roles in terms of tasks or chores. It's like the work world is for men and the home world is for women, type of thing. So that is
Yes.
uh,
It's changing though, right? Don't you think, Maya?
It is. I think it is
yeah.
changing. And some, of course, because everybody, every household changes at a different pace. So some men are learning it the hard way, but it's changing. And I think that especially the younger generations, the men of maybe let's say the millennials and generation Z, uh, they already know that this model is not working and it's not going to work. And it's not that they have been taught so, but because there are more women who are in the workforce nowadays, and that number of women will be increasing. So I think that's how things are.
Oh,
But
that's
yeah.
And on a similar note, I read a couple of years ago about something called RHS. It's a disease,
RHS. Oh,
retired husband syndrome.
Mhm.
It's really a thing, okay?
it
And
is, yes.
and because the Japanese boomers now have retired in mass, right? I mean, a lot at once. Suddenly, this separate life that the husband and wife lived, the women had her friends, and she was happy that he was always at work, and she took care of the house. She was the CEO, but it also gave her the freedom to go out with her lady friends and socialize. And traditional couples didn't really socialize men friends and women friends together. It was always done separately. Again, that's changing, right? But with
Yeah,
this elderly population, suddenly now the husband's home all day. He doesn't even know where the refrigerator is. He doesn't know how to do anything, and he's
yeah,
expecting her to wait on him hand and foot now that he's home all day, and she doesn't want to do that. And they actually had these like educational services designed for retired men on how to adapt and help your wife out at home. And and they interviewed this guy, and he
Wow.
goes, this was great training. I went to the training and they told me that if I did the dishes, it would make my wife really happy. And you know what? She was really happy. Like this was a revelation to him. It never occurred to him, right? So I think it but again, it encapsulates that generation that is on their way out. And I'm part of that generation, by the way. Although I'm an American, so I have different values. But um, the younger generation, just because I think Maya, you mentioned it, people are getting in the workforce now. The
yeah.
families can't survive unless they have two incomes now. It's not like it
Mm,
used to be,
Mm.
right? Just like
yeah,
America. That's how it was in the US, right? So now it's put more pressure on the women because now they're working and they're coming home, and for some of them were expected to do all the work at home and work.
yeah. Mm,
And I think you're seeing that balance out.
yeah.
I hope that's what's happening.
Well, what I've sort of been hearing or reading, let's say, as someone who's not living in Japan, is that this is one of the reasons why the birth rates are dropping. I mean, birth rates and marriage rates. People like millennials and younger people are not getting married and not having, and women are not having children because they find fulfillment in their careers, they're enjoying that sort of thing, and their attitude is no thanks. And conversely, I've also read that men or younger men have this attitude that, look, I want to earn my money, and I want my money to be my money. I don't want to have to hand it over to someone who's then going to manage it for me. I want to do it myself.
mm,
But it's in, mentioning the Japanese men in the kitchen thing. It's so interesting because every Japanese guy that I've learned who has come to live in foreign countries is always amazing at making Japanese food. And I'm always like, so what that means is they probably learned that when they left Japan. So they didn't actually learn it in Japan.
Maybe.
I always just assumed they learned it from their mother. But it seems like from what you guys are saying, it's probably that they left Japan, came to other countries, found that they had, they still wanted to have Japanese food, and then had to learn to make the food
Maybe.
when they were
That's
Yeah.
plausible.
in the country. So that's
plausible. Yeah.
Can't wait to ask one of my Japanese friends who lives in Düsseldorf about this.
Yeah, you should. It's always interesting to get different perspectives. So, but yes, it's also. I remember, when I met my husband, we met back in Bulgaria, and he lived and worked there for 3 years. And so exactly that's the same story, because he wanted to have Japanese food, so he had to learn how to make it himself at home, and that's how he started. Actually, it's not because he learned at home, but because there was no other way to do it. So, but by himself.
I'll bet
So,
all those
yeah.
Tanshin Funin guys learn it. The guys who go
I
on those
guess
business
so, yes.
trips. Yeah, for sure.
Because it's really, I mean, you can, of course, nowadays there are convenience stores everywhere, but at the same time you just get fed up with that stuff. So
The idea of starting off and gaining a bit of a foothold before getting to Japan is going to be really helpful. I know in my mind I think, as I'm doing my master's, I'll be posting about this on social media and showing off how much I'm learning and how much I know. But in reality, I've realized that that's actually quite a difficult thing to do if you're trying to, manage your own life and have a job and study. Finding the time to maintain a consistent social media presence is challenging. So, and that's also, as Tim, you so rightly pointed out, it's so impersonal, because you are broadcasting what you think, but a platform like LinkedIn, I mean, we've spoken about this before, but a platform like LinkedIn, when people comment, they're inviting potential criticism, arguments, all sorts of things. So not everybody feels comfortable doing that, and that's something that I think we actually talked about it in our last podcast, and it was really illuminating for me. It was just like, wow. So that's the way that people feel. And I was I must admit, I was completely insensitive to that. I never thought that other people were watching, or other people thought about how the general public was perceiving them in a conversation. I always just think of these interactions on LinkedIn as between me and the person who's talking. It really,
it didn't register that the whole world is, all your content.
Everyone can see that. And moreover, when you then just continue the discussion, it's broadcast to all of your followers, and they all come.
Right. Yeah.
So,
and Clubhouse isn't that way. I haven't encountered a troll yet. And part of it I attribute that to is when people actually talk to each other, they're respectful. It's harder to dehumanize the other person when you're hearing their voice. And the other thing about Clubhouse is, if somebody does say something rude while they're on stage, the moderator can just throw them back into the audience and shut them up. You can mute their mic. So even if I haven't found, maybe I saw one or two incidences of people trying to troll, but it's the rarity. And of course, it never happens. I haven't seen it happen in your room, Maya. We had a few potential arguments, but there weren't. There were no trolls, right?
No trolling there,
right? Yeah. So it's much easier to dehumanize people on LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter, and
I guess there's also the aspect that it seems like Clubhouse ties you to an identity.
Yes.
And maybe that's
your phone number.
That's
another one. Yes. Good point. No, that's a good point. Yes. That's true. I mean, you can have an anonymous name, but there's still a way to trace it back to your number, because you're registered to your number, right?
So So
Yeah, that's a good point.
that makes people a little bit more careful. I mean, not that, I mean, it should make people careful on LinkedIn, but I think I must admit what I see or in my opinion, LinkedIn became much more, shall we say, toxic because of the
A little bit.
coronavirus lockdowns, or at
Yeah.
least
Oh yeah.
the Europe coronavirus lockdowns. Because before that, I have to say I didn't. I mean, yes, they were still, you know, arguments, and there was the odd troll here and there, but most of the time when people opened up LinkedIn, they were there to. It was very business focused, and
Yeah.
that sort of was eroded by lockdown, where people were then sharing photos of what they were doing at home and
I'm
what they
guilty
were doing with
too.
their kids. I don't mind. I was loving it. I'm not.
Yeah.
Not a criticism at all, but it
No,
definitely.
you know, and I'm kind of like partly Steve Lejeune school of thought. Like, I think business is still about human relationships, and I think you can overdo and become too Facebooky, if that's a word. But what really surprised me about LinkedIn is the toxicity that was created by the without going into detail, let's just say the political situation in the U.S.
Yes.
And what surprised me is I'm happy to talk politics with my friends privately. I'm fine with that. And whether you're on my side or not, I'm fine with it, right? But I always was very cognizant of not mixing business with politics and religion and sexual issues. I mean, that's the
Yeah.
trifecta right there, right? Those were the things that you just avoid because it has nothing to do with business. It's all divisive if you let it be, and people do. So I was surprised because I consider it, maybe I'm old, unprofessional. One way or the other, whether you agree with me or not, I don't think that's the place to express your political opinions. And I've seen it worse. I've seen people like attack each other, insult each other. And I'm like, really? This is LinkedIn? You know, really, are people doing this?
Yeah.
So I don't know. Am I old fashioned? I guess I am.
I don't think so.
Sensible. It sounds more like just sensible.
That's what I think, you know, but that's just me.
Yeah.
Speaking of your passport, it kind of, and I wanted to run this past Maya as well. So assuming you're coming here, Sarai, in 2 years, have you thought about like visa status? Because that's, for Maya and myself, it's not a challenge because our spouses are Japanese, right? So it makes it really, really easy, you know. In your case, what have you looked into the visa dimension of it?
So from what I understand, there's also a business visa that
Yes,
is
yes.
offered. So that would probably be my best bet. Is I mean, I'm fortunate to have had or I picked a lucrative language and a lucrative field to translate it. So
Yes.
so
Yes.
financially, it looks like the most logical thing for me to do would be to prove that I have the money to start a business and just go from there and directly, you know, kind of land there, found my business, get going, and go from there. So I think, but I haven't. I honestly, once I saw that, I didn't research any further. However, I will say that with the German passport, if I'm not mistaken, you can stay for something like 3 months
Yeah.
and figure things out anyway. With the South African passport, there's no such thing.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
There's
Yeah,
no such thing as no.
and you can fly to Korea or Guam and come back and you get a new 3 months.
And then you get a
But-
yes. So,
But the other thing that I think might be important is now that you're establishing your business, I assume you're doing it remotely anyway. So you should be able to say, look, I'm going to continue to have an income because my job is portable. I can do my job anywhere. And these are my clients. And this is my income of last year. And because that's part of the visa approval process. They don't want you coming and taking a job away. Now, because of the area that you're in, and as Christian said, it's in high demand, you can, you know, you'll probably be fine. And I actually had a business that I'm closely affiliated with write a letter saying that they would give me business while I lived here. and they don't follow up and prove it. They just, it was the president of a company. She was vouching for me, saying I'd worked with them in the past, which I had. And that kind of added to it. And I'm sure people, I don't want to speak for Christian, but I'm sure you can find somebody like that who could, write a letter of recommendation if that's what's needed in your application process.
This is going to be one of the more interesting aspects of the visa process, because I do think that that's going to be very helpful for me. What I am wondering is because I must be honest, after going through all of this to get my German citizenship, the question is, do I want to come to Japan and do I want to pursue the path of Japanese citizenship? How do I want to do it with the taxes? Where do I want to get paid and all that sort of stuff? Like, those details are things that I think are going to be deciding factors in the whole process. But I haven't reached the stage of thinking about that yet, because honestly, I'm still so, I mean, the way I see it now is I'll probably have to make a trip to Japan within the next 12 to 15 months, just to kind of satisfy the excitement.
I can't wait. I'm looking forward to that. Yeah.
So absolutely. I mean, because I feel like there are a lot of things that I'm looking forward to and I'm excited about that aren't necessarily to do with the move and the business, but I feel like if I can just get that, I don't know, that oh my gosh, I want to go to Japan feeling.
I understand.
If I can dampen that a little bit, I can focus on the more serious issues.
Yeah.
So I think I need to actually just make a trip to get over that and maybe then come and see what issues are going to come up.
And that's a business expense that you write off, because you're going to be meeting with people over here to build your network.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Well, I was even thinking that it might be a good idea to come and take the JLPT1 in Japan, like come for a long enough period of time that I have I have time to become immersed in the language and in the culture and everything, and then take the JLPT1, because we all know how impressive that is to Japanese people. I don't know if I told you this, but because I've mentioned it to Tim, these standardized tests and things, I focused more on learning the medical Japanese, because medical Japanese is obviously, it's a language on its own.
It is. Yeah.
So I focused on all of that, but I didn't necessarily focus on learning kind of everyday Japanese, or even especially things like business, maybe not so much business Japanese, like keigo, but more like financial Japanese, to describe financial terms or just general everyday things. So in order to fill those gaps in my knowledge, and obviously for my CV, I started the path of taking the JLPT examination. So I've just done the JLPT 2, because I thought starting with 1 would be too much of a challenge, but I didn't do the ones before that either. But I think with the level 1, I really think it'll be helpful to spend some actual time living in Japan, immersing myself in the language, and then take that and use that as kind of the period of time, as you say, Tim, to network and do all of these things.
From my experience, I don't think that the test material has changed a lot. I think that, there is, basically, if you want to spend some time in Japan and immerse yourself in the Japanese culture, that's definitely something you should do. But I don't think that it will help you with, the test, the first level, Japan JLPT1, because, of course, what can help you immersing yourself in Japanese culture and everyday life is very different from what you get, to what knowledge you get you have to demonstrate at the test. So if you want to prepare yourself for that level 1, then you have to spend your days in the library here, reading, some old books, with old grammar, which is never used in everyday Japanese. Yeah. I mean,
see what you're saying.
which if you want to do that, oh, it's great, just go and do it. But I don't think that, and that's the funny thing, I always talk with this about this with my friends, also with my husband. Why did I need level one? I never used that grammar, for my business,
Yeah.
communication.
Yeah.
and and but and he says, just like you, Sarai, it's because it's very important for the Japanese companies,
Mm,
and when you have you on your resume, and then, well, it's helpful. But
mm.
at the same time, you know for business work, for work here in Japan, the most you need is level 2.
Yeah.
So it's really funny, but how
That's
this is how things are.
It's like
I've heard.
a
So
merit badge. It's
Yeah,
yes,
yes.
indeed,
it's
like
just
a merit badge.
symbolic. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I've
And
Indeed.
I've heard this from so many people. I've heard this from so many people
Sorry to
that the
just.
the grammar that's never. In fact, it was interesting because I had a tutor who has now become my assistant, and she's Japanese, um, and so in order for her to support me, I arranged for her to get these Kanzen master textbooks. And when she read them, she said, "Oh my word!" She's like, "This is I don't think I've used this grammar since I was at school, and I had to learn it the first time." I was like, "Okay,
Yeah,
well."
yeah,
Um, I
that's
guess
true.
but what you said is such an interesting point. It's like, yes, the actual Japanese is not going to. I think that you need to learn from the textbooks. I think where I where I struggle is the fact that when I so unfortunately I'm not coming into contact with Japanese in my social life. It's specifically for business. So whenever I see Japanese, I like my brain almost goes, this is work, right? It's like going to work kind of thing. I
yeah.
don't one of the hardest things for me was to learn to read, so to go into the reading section of these tests and be able to read it in the way that was required for the test. I was always reading it like I have to translate this, you know what I mean? So I was
Right.
taking forever to understand every word and the nuance and everything. And I remember the very first time that I took the test, and I'd finished the grammar section, and I think I'd done one reading. So there's about 15 passages that you have to read, some short, some long. And I remember getting to the passage, and I read the first passage, and I answered it, and I was satisfied that I had the answer right, and they said 5 minutes left, and I was just
Oh.
like, excuse me. Like I spent way too much time on the stuff, and I have this impression that it might be easier if I've come into contact with Japanese in everyday life for me to not immediately look at it and think work. But I completely agree with what you're saying, that the actual content is exactly, I'll be sitting in libraries, reading old Japanese literature, and that's what's actually gonna help me to pass.
Yeah.
You know, I think Tyson Batino. Do you know Tyson, Maya?
No, I
He's
don't.
one of my connections on LinkedIn. He's a young guy. He's actually from Hawaii, so he's from the same island I used to live on. But I met him online. I've never met him in person, but he's a go-getter, and he's really into helping people learn the language in JLPT one. He passed it, so he might be a good connection, someone to connect you with, just for
Mm,
guidance on how to attack the test.
Yeah.
How to
mm,
get
mm,
that
mm.
certification. Just so you guys know, we now have 5 minutes left. Um, so let's maybe wrap it up. But we
Yes.
got 4 or 5 minutes to chat. So
Yeah.
anything you guys want to add to what we talked about before we all say goodbye?
No, I I think it was amazing meeting Christian and meeting Maya. It's been so good to have this personal connection.
Yeah.
Um, I've really enjoyed it, but no, I'm so satisfied. I've got so much to go back and think about.
I'm just so lucky to know these great people like you guys. I get inspired just talking to you guys. So it really adds a lot to me, to my life, just having these friendships. And thanks. I hate to say it, but thanks to COVID, I mean, I would probably never have gotten to know you guys. Definitely Sarai. I don't think I would have gotten to know you for sure. Had you not taken my online cross-cultural communication seminar.
Yes.
She actually went through the whole thing with me. And I lost count how many, because we took it real slow and just chatted. It was very informal, but we covered everything.
For me, it was great.
I had a blast.
It was so much fun, because I remember Tim saying in the beginning, I'm a storyteller, so I'll go into stories now. I'll share personal experiences, and that's how you learn, right? Or that's how I teach, and I interpreted this as that's how that I was going to learn from the stories, and to have this personal connection, I thought was interesting. But when we actually started and we got stuck into the material, that was what impressed me the most. Was you have an amazing amount of knowledge about Japan and Japanese culture and the people, and you have an enormous amount of experience, but you also have a way to make it seem so much less academic than it could be. You know what I mean? It was so easy to absorb, because I just felt like it was, it's hard to describe. It's hard to relate it to anything else in real life. What kept me coming back was the fact that I was learning without actually having to put in effort to learn. So I'm so happy that you offered that. I'm so grateful.
Well, I learned a lot too, and it went both ways. So, I come from a long line of Irish bullshitters. So we're all storytellers. We're all talkers. So it's in my DNA.
But that's what made it great. Because again, I think they were probably. Well, I mean, I don't know. I imagine that it was something that a lot of people would have been curious about. But I wonder whether, the kind of, because it took me away from the stress of thinking about how many people, the news was constantly telling us how many people were dying, and, where COVID was, flaring up next. And it gave me a couple of hours every, whatever it was, either a week or, sometimes more than, or twice a week. It gave me time to clear my head and stop thinking about all the drama and focus on something that I found interesting. But your personality was what kept me coming back. I mean, the material was great, but it was your personality that kept me coming back. So thanks for being you.
Yeah. And thank you. And thank you, Maya. And we're about to be cut off, but I just want to say thank you guys so much for today. Let's do it again.
Yeah. Let's do it again.
And hopefully I'll see you guys, all of you, on Clubhouse soon.
Yes.
Right.
Very much looking forward to it.
Sarai.
Right. Oh, sorry. I just put you, in the spotlight.
It's okay. It's okay. Can someone just send me a link though? Can someone an invite though? Can someone please send
Yes,
me
I will. I will do that for you.
Thanks. And then I'll sign up today.
Yes.
Finally.
All right. All right. I think we're all going to turn into a pumpkin real soon. So I'll just shut this off before automatically, right? Digital pumpkin. But so thank you. Thank you, everyone. Let's talk soon.
Thank you.
Love you guys. All right. Bye-bye.
See you.